2023. My name's Kwon, and I have the honor, dubious as it might be, to moderate this fun panel of the 7 Colorado River Basin State Principles as this Colorado River community works to respond to and react and adapt to both near and long-term challenges and make landmark decisions and changes to operations on the basin. As background, I'm a recovering attorney who's been working on the river for about 20 years. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Coloradan, but I'm also, I think, been known to find ways to consider other perspectives and reach agreements across the divides. Had you told me back in 2006 that that would be my first of 17 Decembers in Las Vegas, I probably would have laughed and thought, yeah, whatever. But it's true, and I have to admit I think I'm better for it, because this crew of people is pretty special to be able to come together and find ways to learn, impart wisdom, and actually find solutions for at least another year. Currently, I'm the Associate Director of the Colorado River Sustainability Campaign, where I still try to find solutions among these fine panelists and on behalf of tribes and the environment. And in both of those capacities, I've had the pleasure and sometimes the need to butt heads with the people on this panel and their predecessors as we worked to implement the guidelines, negotiate minutes with Mexico, figure out the long-term experimental management plan on the Glen Canyon Dam, do the drought contingency plans, convince people that maybe we need the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act funding, all of those things. And at some of those times, I think some people on this panel have actually said, Karen, only dogs can hear you now. So the reality is I can be a pretty impassioned person, and hopefully will be today, but I'm not the only impassioned person on this panel. Each of these people, each of the men and women on the panel are demonstrate on a daily basis their commitment, their dedication, and their focus to all things Colorado River. I'm not going to read their bios. They're in that'll take the entire presentation, so we're not going to do that. But what we are going to do is, today's theme is the outreach to impacted communities in the Colorado River Basin, which begs the question, I got to see if this works. I don't know if there's something up here. There we go. Which begs the question of what the impacted community in the Colorado River Basin is. And that depends on your perspective, because you can divide it according to geographies. You got the upper basin, the lower basin. You got headwaters, you got downstream users. You got the US, you got Mexico. You can divide it into
talking to the mic.
Interests, if this works. Here we go. Governing authorities, we have the entire federal agencies and branches of government. We have the states. We have the Upper Colorado River Commission. We have the IBWC. We have a lot of cities, communities, chambers of commerce, individuals. And we also have 30 tribes in the Colorado River Basin that also need to be recognized. You could be divided into interests and rights, whether it be domestic, ag, industrial, recreational, cultural, all of those. It can be divided into ecosystems and habitats. And it can also be divided into political boundaries of red and blue, or even sports teams if you really want to. But regardless of what community you identify with, or communities, we're all facing some shared realities. The Colorado River water supply is not what it used to be. We're in a hotter and drier situation with less water. There are more people today who rely on the water and need the water of the Colorado River Basin than at any other time, whether it be the results of Mother Nature or engineered decisions. We have hydrologic shortages and administrative shortages to address the issues in the basin. Going forward, water users and the natural and engineered infrastructure are going to have to be more flexible, more resilient, and adaptable to the changing conditions. And finally, past is not prologue. It has not been a good barometer for us in the 21st century to rely on what we've done in the past. not just from a hydrologic sense, but also because it overlooks the important connections that tribal nations have to the Colorado River Basin and ignores the fundamental connections that the Colorado River's environment has for everybody who relies on it. And faced with these realities, no one category can capture what constitutes a community in the Colorado River Basin. Just like my photos don't capture everything and potentially miss some glaring things, we can't parse out the basin into different communities completely. It overlooks the humanity of us, and it also it forgets the commonality that makes us the Colorado River Basin. Because the truth is, we're not red or blue. The river's not red or blue. It's actually both. It's sometimes green. And while we have a very engineered system from Flaming Gorge down to Morelos Dam and Cap in between, we also have the very true fact that the river also is a wonder that buffers us from wildfire, supports the resources that we all live on, and inspires and awes us and reminds us that we're connected to the river. Which is why I think these people on this stage have to get more granular and global at the same time. They have to get more granular to meet and understand what each of the people in the basin need, but also global in thinking about how to answer the questions and find the solutions that will help us all. And that's why I want to ask some questions of them, and I'll stop talking now. So with that, I want to talk about their outreach to the community and maybe delve into some of the talking points that they use to figure out what they mean. So first, to the entire panel, I'm going to ask, as governor representatives to each of the 7 basin states, you've been appointed by your governors to represent the interests in problem solving the challenges of the basin. Can you talk about your stakeholder interest dynamics in each of your states? What are they, and how you reconcile them with different dynamics in other states? John Entsminger can go first.
Sure, happy to go first because ours is probably the most straightforward, although from the outside it may seem simple. Nevada has relatively homogeneous water politics. We have one Native American reservation in the state with a fully quantified and satisfied water right in the decree. So tribal issues aren't a big deal internal to Nevada. We have no agriculture, so it really is M&I. But we have asked every sector of our community to make sacrifices so that we can live within our relatively meager 1.8% legal entitlement on the Colorado River. So that takes political will, that takes significant capital funding, and the main way we have achieved that is through impaneling citizens committees to try to reach consensus across different sectors within that M&I sector in order to move the ball forward. So that's it for Nevada.
And J.B. Hamby from California.
Absolutely. California is an incredibly diverse state, and the Colorado River Board of California was put together in 1937 to help bring all of our users and agencies together. We have on our board 3 urban agencies: San Diego County Water Authority, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, 3 agricultural agencies: the Imperial Irrigation District, Coachella Valley Water District, Palo Verde Irrigation District. Historically, Governor Newsom appointed President Joaquin, who led us in the invocation here, to the Colorado River Board, representing the Fort Yuma-Quezon Indian Tribe, the 2nd largest tribe in California. We also have Frank Reeves from the Audubon Society representing NGOs, taking a look at the Salton Sea issues. And we also have the state of California representing 2 seats as well. California's dynamics are very long. We came together historically. The Imperial Valley used water very early on in the history of the Colorado River, banded together with the early origins of the Metropolitan Water District to further develop the Colorado River, build the Hoover Dam. And throughout the history of California's use on the Colorado River, there's been cooperation and occasionally conflict. But importantly here, in the year 2023, this October is the 20th anniversary of the Quantification Settlement Agreement. The phrase that Adel Haj Khalil uses often, "we are one," that's not a phrase you might have heard 20 years ago when the agencies in California were figuring out a way to reduce its use 800,000 acre feet from one year to the next and continue to do so on a permanent basis moving forward. But through that whole process, California's urban, agricultural, and tribal entities have banded together to live within our current entitlement on the Colorado River and do things that are important like we did yesterday. signing agreements to generate 1.6 million acre-feet of water to leave that in the Colorado River, benefiting the entire basin in partnerships with our partners in Arizona and Nevada. So California's dynamics span the gamut, really. You have the Metropolitan Water District, representing 19 million people across the coast and inland empire areas in Southern California. That's one dynamic. The Palo Verde Valley, a small family farm community right there on the river, in the Imperial Valley, another dynamic as well. And another role I represent in the Imperial Irrigation District Board of Directors, have to do some door knocking and explain decisions directly to people themselves. So there's a lot of different dynamics in California, and as complicated and complex as some of these issues have been over time, California's agencies have banded together, recognizing the severity and the importance of these issues for our state to benefit the Colorado River and to protect our respective rights and interests.
And Tom Buschatzke from Arizona.
So I have a little bit of diversity in the state of Arizona. I think you all know I've got 22 federally recognized tribes out of the 30 in the basin. I've got agricultural users, industrial users, municipal users. There's somewhere around 85 contracts with Arizona water users with the Secretary, Section 5 contracts to use Colorado River water, and lots of subcontracts and other contracts that flow from those major contracts. Some are really small, some are really large. We also have the pleasure of taking, at least under the 07 guidelines and drought contingency plan, the biggest brunt of mandatory shortages. In 2023, we've had to take 592,000 acre-feet of cuts, and it will be 512,000 acre-feet next year. In the central part of my state, Pinal County, the farmers who rely on Colorado water supplies have lost all of their water, resulting in fallowing of some 40 or 50% of their farmland. I have the added pleasure in the state of Arizona of being required, whenever a, quote, sovereign right or claim of the state is implicated in any agreement that I might sign with the people on this stage or the federal government, of having to get legislative approval, which I had to do for the drought contingency plan. But that created an opportunity as well, and we created a committee, it was called the steering committee, that had stakeholders and legislators in a room to work out a plan to deal with the impacts of the drought contingency plan. And we have moved that process forward. It's now called the Arizona Reconsultation Committee. It's probably about 50 or so different parties. We've added more tribal representation to that committee, more non-tribal representation recently, and also power industry representatives. So we have lots of diversity, we have lots of issues. Many of those are connected to our groundwater management in our state. Again, we have a requirement for home building in our active management areas where 80% of our population lives to show a 100-year renewable water supply before a home can be built. Challenges over the last several years have daylighted there as well. So there's lots of tentacles, lots of connections. We have lots of diversity. And honestly, to be very inclusive is somewhat of a struggle. I think all 85 of those people would like to be in every meeting I have with these people sitting next to me. But we figured out a way for me and some other representatives of the state to be in those rooms to represent our larger set of water users. And I think that is critical to us in dealing with what ultimately I believe will be a requirement for the director of the Department of Water Resources to go to the legislature when we end up with whatever we end up after 2026. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. And then Becky Mitchell from Colorado.
Thanks. I think we all have complexities with our individual states. I think Colorado's no exception. Incredibly complex. Thousands of water rights holders, thousands of producers across the state. So that kind of keying into something Tom mentioned, that makes us very involved. That makes all of the water rights holders very involved in what we're doing here and watchful, which I think is good. They hold me accountable. That's because the Colorado River provides water for the Front Range of Colorado as well as the Western Slope, along with 2 federally recognized tribes. It provides 40% of our state's water, and so I make decisions on, as I make decisions on an interstate level, I absolutely have to engage folks across Colorado. As an example of that, I had to do a tour earlier this year and go across pretty much to every basin in the state, whether it was in the Colorado River Basin or not, because the Colorado River touches every corner of the state. We have differences in Colorado, differences of opinion, differences of thought, differences of direction, but we share that vested interest in protecting the Colorado River for both present and future generations. As I've had those discussions, it really shaped how I sit at this table and what I push for as I sit at this table, because that is who I am defending, is the users of all of Colorado. It's not a one-way street, though. I have to go back and sell to them what I commit to here. And sometimes that's not easy. Any deal I make, like these gentlemen have mentioned, sometimes it's an easy sell, sometimes it's a hard sell. They've let me know really clearly what they will accept, what they will not accept. One of those things that they've made very clear is that they will not accept a status quo, moving forward in the same direction that we have been going. They're not interested in me striking a deal that allows the continuation of depleting the storage and driving the system into crisis. That being said, however, Coloradans have shown that they have been a part of the solution. They will continue to be a part of the solution. They've been doing voluntary conservation. There's innovative work on farms and ranches across all of the state. We do strict administration on a daily basis. Folks are getting cut off, even in years like this last year. Rights that predate the compact get cut off on a regular basis, and so because the water is not available. So.
Brandon Gebhart from Wyoming.
Thank you. In Wyoming, about 110,000 people in our state rely on the Colorado River. That's not a big number, but it's over a fifth of our state. In many regards, Wyoming is very similar to what it was in 1922. In 22, the Reclamation Service estimated that Wyoming's irrigation accounted for about 550,000 acre-feet per year. Current estimates were about 600,000 acre-foot per year. That's over about 300,000 acres of irrigated land in Wyoming. About 84% of our water use is irrigated ag. And that's over 2,500 diversions and over 6,000 individual water rights. The Wyoming water users have been experiencing the effects of drought for over 130 years. That drought and the reduced water supply has hindered growth. It's forced folks to retire use marginal lands, and it has caused junior users to start seeking senior water rights, causing distrust between our water users. So what we're doing to communicate a little better, Wyoming used to do informal meetings around the state trying to educate and receive input from our stakeholders. More recently, the Wyoming governor established a Colorado River working group to be a conduit between the decision makers, policy makers, and the stakeholders. And then more recently, our legislature established the Wyoming's Colorado River Advisory Committee. That committee is comprised of 11 folks of all water use sectors. We've had a couple of meetings with them. That will be a very good conduit for us to communicate with our water users on all the things going on in Colorado River.
Thank you. And we have Estevan López from New Mexico.
Thank you. New Mexico, among the upper basin states, is we receive the smallest apportionment. We get 11.25% of the water that's available for the upper basin. And you know, if we did the arithmetic of 7.5 million, and you know, take off Arizona's portion and apply that percentage, New Mexico should have a right to get somewhere on the order of 840,000 acre feet. In fact, we're using something like 410,000 acre feet. That water serves the users within the San Juan Basin, primarily represented through the San Juan Water Commission that represents municipalities, and then there's ag users, industrial, in the basin. We have four tribes that depend on within New Mexico that depend on Colorado River water. The Navajo Nation, by far the largest, and obviously the Navajo is not only in New Mexico; they extend into Arizona and Utah as well. We have the Jicarilla Apache Reservation that's entirely within New Mexico. The Ute Mountain Ute Reservation has some land base within New Mexico, although no population base. We're working on water rights settlements with them. And then there's the Zuni tribe that's part of the lower basin, and you know, oftentimes I forget to mention them because we focus quite often just on upper basin related, but clearly we have an obligation to them as well. Another important user in New Mexico are the beneficiaries of the San Juan Chama project, and that includes the largest city in New Mexico, Albuquerque, and several other cities within the Rio Grande Basin, our capital, Santa Fe. And just to put this in context, New Mexico is we're right up there with Nevada in terms of being the driest state in the nation. We don't have a lot of water, and we're a big state. So this San Juan or Colorado River water is, while it's not a huge amount by perhaps other states, in comparison to what other states have to work with, it's a really important supply for New Mexico. We've been doing outreach to all of these water user groups, with increased frequency, and just trying to keep everybody abreast of what's at play and what's at stake in this, and what they might do to contribute to solutions. And as part of that outreach, one of the things that we're particularly proud of is the really good and productive relationships that we have with our tribes, and we want to continue that. And we're also working really well with our tribes as part of the Upper Colorado River Commission and all of the upper basin tribes. And I think that engagement, that work with the tribes is going to be absolutely crucial towards finding a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Jean Shawcroft from Utah.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. As far as Utah is concerned, I don't know that there's a lot of difference between what has been described. We have a number of interests, a number of stakeholders. Most of you know that a lot of the water that Utah uses from the Colorado River flows to the Wasatch Front. About 2/3 of the water that is delivered along the Wasatch Front is delivered from the Colorado River. We have a huge dependency on the Colorado River and have had for a number of years. One of the things that's really interesting, in addition to the water users, there are a number of streams in the Uinta Basin east of the Wasatch Front, and even some on the other side where we're required to have in-stream flows. And that hasn't been mentioned. I know that's part of many other states' responsibilities as well, but there are significant interests and significant requirements for us to make sure that each of those reaches that's included in agreements has sufficient flow year-round. And that's something that's very significant as we think about how we have interests on the river or stakeholders. I would just like to mention a couple of things with regard to the hydrology. As has been mentioned, and we all are very aware, last year was a banner year. It was absolutely incredible. There were places in Utah where there was over 300% of a normal snowpack. I've told many people many times, Mother Nature threw us two lifelines. One, we had an incredible snowpack and a record-breaking snowpack in Utah, and secondly, Mother Nature delivered that off of the snowpack in a perfect way. Temperatures increased in April, got everyone's attention, and then the temperatures moderated so that the peak flows we saw in April really didn't materialize any higher than that the rest of the runoff, which was absolutely amazing. We could have easily been washed off the map with that much water. That all said, it's important to recognize that over time, during the 90s, for example, one of the large projects in Utah received about 200,000 acre-feet of water on an annual basis. Since 2000, that number has dropped by 25%, to about 150,000 acre-feet. So there is uncertainty. The variable nature of Mother Nature just doesn't help us at times. I was asked many, many times last year, so what are you going to do with all the water that comes from the snow? And they were shocked when I said, we're going to fill storage. That water's not going to run down the streams, it's going to fill storage. Many of the small reservoirs, of course, filled. Some of them would have filled multiple times. But the larger reservoirs still didn't fill. Even after a great year, Lake Powell came up 65 feet, but there was still 100 feet to go. And so even though we had an incredible snowpack, we're still way behind where we need to be. And this year doesn't look a whole lot better. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, everybody. So a couple of the talking points, I think some of them have been mentioned today, but I'm going to put some of you on the spot. One of them is we need to live within, Jean, you said, all of us depend significantly on the Colorado River. And that river isn't producing what it used to. We need to learn to live within what the river provides us is the talking point. And it makes sense, but I think we all have a little bit different understanding of what that means. So I'm going to start with you, Becky, but what does that mean to you? And how do you think we need to adapt to the changing conditions?
I think this one is a little bit easier for me to answer, partly because we live within the means of the river on an annual basis in the Upper Basin, not because we are better people, but because we have to. Because we have no choice in that. And so what that looks like, to be really transparent about that, is that when there's not snowpack, when there's not water in the rivers and streams, folks get cut off. Very senior water right holders get cut off. Oftentimes that will mean if there is a producer that they're not able to produce that year. That means sometimes that they don't have a job. That's rough. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it is an immediate response to Mother Nature. And I'm not saying that that is easy to do. And those reservoirs were built to equalize that to some level. But I think when I say live within the means of the river, I'm saying let's look at hydrology as part of the factor of what is delivered. Let's look and see when there are red flags that say we are getting to a place that is far too risky. than the 40 million people that rely on this river deserve. That's what I am saying, is that we need to make decisions earlier, and we need to address things like the structural deficit immediately.
Thank you. I'm going to pick on you, Tom, to answer it from your perspective, too.
Thank you, Karen. I would echo exactly what Becky said. There are generations of water users in the state of Utah who have learned to live with uncertainty. There are projects in Utah that would have been built, but the reliability of the water from the Colorado River wasn't there, and they weren't economic to build. And so that uncertainty is something that we live with every year. Not last year, but the prior 2 or 3 years, as Becky mentioned, water rights are cut off. There were places in Utah where the water was cut off back to an 1870s right. And this is the scary thing, by the middle of April. So there wasn't water for a few weeks or a few days or a few months. There was no water at all back to the 1870 water rights. And that's something that the water users have lived with, recognized that that's something they have to live with. And my hope is that we can continue to be smarter about how we use our water so we can continue to have the uses we have, but just simply have them more efficiently.
Thank you. Tom, what do you think?
So I won't repeat where reductions have hit Arizona again, but I think we're stepping up in discussions about post-2026 in the lower basin to own the structural deficit, to own the supply and demand imbalance. And I think that number is not quite defined yet. There's a range that that number might be. And so we're going to own that. But I expect once we own that, that the need to further stabilize the river, which I think exists, be a shared responsibility with everyone in the basin, all 7 states, and Mexico. And so I think you started with the past shouldn't be prologue, and it's not. We're not moving into the same place we've been. But likewise, from my perspective, the starting point for Arizona, when you combine the 07 guidelines in DCP of 720,000 acre-feet of shortages, shouldn't also be the starting point. It's not 720,000 acre-feet plus for Arizona. Again, it's a new world. We're going to own the structural deficit collectively in the lower basin and advocate with the federal government in Mexico that they take a piece of that as well. But again, that will not be enough, and I see a need for all 7 states in Mexico to then participate to help collectively do the rest. And is that equal 1 acre-foot, 1 acre-foot, 1 acre-foot, all 7 states in Mexico? No. But some formula in which there's participation by those who benefit from the river to help protect it.
JB, you want to add to that at all?
Absolutely. In full agreement with Tom, the structural deficit has been a long time coming. There is a supply-demand imbalance in the lower basin. It's been added on to through long unresolved components of the law of the river. When we added on the Mexican Treaty, when we added on additional use in the lower basin through the 68 Act, adding on additional uses over time, we continued to compound this problem that's been known for a very long time. It's not a new issue. What is new is that being able to rely on flows that used to exist with demands that have increased over the last 100 years, there's a mismatch there. And so where we're at in the lower basin is a recognition that we have to solve and own that supply-demand imbalance. It's going to be tough, it's going to be challenging, but it's absolutely necessary if we want to make sure that the millions of people and hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland and the tribes in the lower basin don't go without water. That is an entirely untenable situation to have those users and those communities not have a drop of water to flow through a canal or flow through an aqueduct to be able to sustain 19 million people in Southern California, to sustain the population in Central Arizona, to be able to provide water to Mexico, to be able to provide water to the lower basin tribes. That being said, that's our responsibility. This is a historic thing coming, and it's on our shoulders to be able to resolve it. But as Tom also mentioned, this is a big problem. That's just one component of it. We're looking forward to a future of climate change. It's very uncertain what that's going to entail. This is a basin-wide problem that's going to require basin-wide solutions. There is no user, no state, no country, no basin that can stand up and say, we're out, this is a basin-wide problem, but we're not part of it. It's going to require every single user to be able to participate in resolving this problem in the future. That's a collective responsibility that's incumbent upon everyone who benefits from this stream. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Everyone has to be able to participate. That is the path forward if we're going to have success.
Thank you. I want to pivot just a little bit. I think we're here a lot and we're talking a lot today and at this CRWUA about the post-2026 effort and the interim guidelines. And we can evaluate the current guidelines, but I think we're all kind of sit here and hope and wonder what's going to be in those guidelines, because we all have been talking about what challenges we're facing in the basin. And I think everybody would really like those guidelines to fix those challenges. But we also heard, and I think accurately, that the interim guidelines are not a silver bullet. They are not the solution to everything in the basin. And I'd like to explore with some of you, what are the guidelines? What are they and what aren't they? And what else do we need in addition to the guidelines to help the basin? John, I'll go with you first.
Thanks, Karen. So my youngest son was born 12 days before we signed the 2007 guidelines, and that child turned 16 on November 30th. So it's been a long road learning the lessons we've learned from the 07 guidelines. Much has been written about the imperfection of those guidelines, and I believe, at least on stage here, Estevan and I are the only ones that were materially involved in formulating those guidelines. And they are far from perfect. What I can tell you is the people involved did the best we could. We used the best available science we had at the time. Bureau of Reclamation was telling us there was less than a 4% probability of what has ultimately come to pass, would come to pass. So we need to keep that in mind as we move into the future. The post-26 guidelines will not be a panacea. They will largely focus on plumbing. They will focus on how we operate the big reservoirs. They will focus on what reductions must be taken to address the structural deficit. And they will hopefully focus on some flexibility that will allow innovation and new water supplies to be brought online, at least in the lower basin, and to be moved around and shared and address the challenges of the future. But the one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty the post-26 guidelines will deliver will be a messy compromise that will be judged harshly by history. That's the cold reality. The only question for the people in this room is whether we will deliver that messy compromise or whether or not people outside of this room will.
Estevan, can I pick on you as well?
Well, as has been noted, clearly the 2007 guidelines were insufficient for what we're facing today. One element that I'm incredibly heartened by is the lower basin's commitment that they're going to take on and deal with for the first time the structural deficit. That gets us very far in this whole thing, and so as to what these new interim guidelines are going to look like, That's a key feature. It's got to be a key feature. But then we all recognize, everyone up here recognizes that there's going to have to be more. And as Tom mentioned, it's going to be a shared responsibility, no doubt about it. But the reality of things, nobody's going to be left out. The reality is we need to also acknowledge the reality that the upper basin largely faces that the lower basin hasn't had to face. And that is the hydrologic shortages that happen year after year after year and will continue to happen and probably be worse as things get drier. So, you know, we often have difficulty kind of making that connection, or why is there an equivalence there? Well, just as Arizona right now is being cut as a result of DCP, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming are being cut as a result of hydrology. And often those cuts are very, very high. And that comes on top of the fact that we haven't had the water to fully develop our apportionment. So there has to be an acknowledgement that is real, it's not a contribution. We often talk about it as a contribution, but it is a share of the pain that we suffer year after year. And we will do more than just that. We understand that there has to be more that we will have to do. But there has to be an acknowledgement that that's part of our contribution. And we need to be able to protect our water uses as best we can in doing that, and including, we're still trying to build out things like the Navajo Gallup water supply project that is going to send water to communities that today don't have water to their homes. So it's a huge balancing act. I think we've got, as John mentioned, it's going to be imperfect. Whatever we come up with is going to be imperfect, but we're all going to have to share in it, and we've got to leave ourselves enough flexibility so that if those imperfections are exposed, we need to be able to adjust and right the ship, if you will.
Thank you. Tom, I'm going to ask, just expand on that to the second part of the question of the guidelines are not a panacea, and they're going to be imperfect, but they're going to be what we can get to. What else do we need? And just maybe what else does Arizona need, or what else can we, in addition to the guidelines, what can we do as a community or together to try to help?
I think John mentioned a bunch of those things already. There are going to be opportunities to develop and deploy other resources, reclaimed water. There's partnerships being worked on with California and Arizona now in that regard. The tools to allow for conservation to be created, create those conservation benefits to Lake Mead, compensated system conservation, things like that, I think are tools that we need to move forward. There are some concerns about some of those tools in Arizona in terms of are they creating an opportunity to kind of undo the priority system within Arizona? So we have to work through those issues. But it can't just be about mandatory cuts. I mean, mandatory cuts certainly for Arizona are going to be there. But opportunities to mitigate partially the really negative impacts of those cuts, I think, are certainly in our future. One thing that I hear quite a bit, but I don't think we can really make happen is I want to be compensated fully for every cut we have to take now and for the next set of guidelines, and I don't see that happening. I don't see the federal treasury having those kinds of resources, and especially as we reduce our uses even more in the basin and in Arizona, the number of impacted parties is increasing, and so that cost, that price tag is increasing as well. So we have to deploy every tool available. And besides the fact that the guidelines won't be a panacea, there's no one thing we're going to do that's going to be a panacea to mitigate the impacts of the reductions we're going to have to all take to deal with our future. And, you know, someone talked about Mother Nature earlier, but and it was Gene about Mother Nature this past year, but there's a new Mother Nature taking over. So channeling my inner Guess Who.
Thank you. So I'm going to pivot again, and we're going to talk about, John alluded to it, but the past 20 years have taught us that it's not enough to rely on forecasts. We also have to rely on, and it's not good to be managing from crisis to crisis. I think we all know that. We have to start working within what the river consistently provides us, but we have to do that together. And because if we don't figure it out, it's going to be figured out for us. And so I guess I'm kind of at the stage of wanting to know, how are we leaving it up to you guys with this group to get to the consensus, or are we going to run to 9 robes in DC to figure it out eventually? John, I'll ask you.
Fantastic. I said at the Upper Colorado River Commission yesterday, the universe of possible action is constrained by litigation, legislation, and negotiation. It was true yesterday morning. I believe it's still true this morning. Litigation is so, appealing, right? We're going to get those guys. We're going to win. Our position's clear. Look at what it says on the piece of paper. Obviously, we're going to win. But anyone, and there's many, many people in this room that have been involved in complex water litigation, and a lot of people in this room that have been involved in compact litigation on other river systems, nothing is certain. Anyone who is telling you we should pursue the litigation path because that's how we're going to secure our future, what they're actually telling you is they're willing to roll the dice with your future. Because all you're doing is changing out water professionals who know and have worked on and love this river for guys and gals in black robes that know very, very little about our river. And what the outcome of that litigation would be, no one can tell you. The same is true of legislation. I don't know how strong everyone in the room's faith is in democracy, but I've been watching Congress, and they haven't been producing a whole lot of results recently. So if you think their 535 people inside the Beltway are going to step in and solve our problems for us, I would suggest the contrary is the most likely outcome. The only viable path towards us achieving anything that remotely works for everyone is the negotiation path, and that requires compromise. It's a bad word in our political discourse these days, but every state, every water user must be willing to compromise in order to make this river work for everyone. And I still think, and maybe I'm naive or just am so down on the other two options, to believe that that sort of compromise on this river system is still possible. So think on that, think on your own individual use, think on what you can do to be part of the solution, and let's keep going.
Brandon, how do we get to that compromise?
Thank you, Karen. And I agree with John. We've been telling our folks in our state for years that there are 3 options. The only option that reduces the risk to our water users is a consensus solution. Anything else is taken out of our hands, likely by people who understand the system much less than we do. So our best option to protect our water users, and I would say that we all have the same priority, and that's to protect our water use. But the only way that we can come to that without risking outside influence is for us to come to a consensus solution. I think it takes communication, I think it takes trust, and I think it takes an understanding of the issues in each of the other states so that we can help develop solutions that will work for all of the states.
Thank you. Becky, how about you?
I want to be real clear right now. I think ideally it is something that all 7 basin states can come up with together. But I want to be real clear that we can't accept something that continues to drain the system that puts 40 million people at risk. So first and foremost, when we talk about compromise, it's incredibly important that our previous compromises will be recognized. Absolutely be recognized. The fact that the upper basin states have not been able to fully develop to their 7.5 million acre feet allocation, not a right, because you don't have a right to something that is not there. I think that's important. We have to absolutely acknowledge that that's the first hit. The second hit is the hydrologic shortages that we take on a constant basis. And so to get to agreement, what the roll of the dice is continuing to drain the system and not build back storage in a way that protects these people. That's the roll of the dice. That is the roll of the dice. So absolutely, we will sign onto something that protects the water users that have already given and will continue to give and absolutely give, because they do every day. So yes, I don't want to be in Supreme Court with my friends on the panel, sometimes friends, sometimes not, but I can't accept something that doesn't acknowledge that. And I have to be real clear. One of the first things about that is transparency. Transparency in accounting, transparency in the uses across the lower basin. That's how we get to the solution, is more information.
Thank you. JB, go for it.
I want to start with a quote I had heard recently and then talk about some of experience with compromise and working to a solution. I've heard a quote, or read a quote some months ago, and it, I'll say, is not in my respective basin. And the quote went along the lines of, "The only time you should compromise is when you can't advance your position any further." That is the wrong approach. If every single person on this stage takes that position with their state, we are guaranteeing we're going to end up in the Supreme Court. I watched The Deer Hunter recently. Russian roulette sounds like an interesting, sometimes lucrative game until it doesn't work out for you any longer. And that's what the Supreme Court or the Congress is for us. Bringing it to a more recent set of examples. We were in a very dark place this January in the basin. The commissioner had called for 2 to 4 million acre feet of reductions. That's a big number. To put it in context again, California, to make 800,000 acre feet of permanent reductions, took years to negotiate that, took a decade to be able to uphold it against all kinds of litigation, but we've done it. That was challenging. So to hear 2 to 4 million acre feet, which was necessary at the time, was an astonishing thing, and in such a short period of time. We went through the fall, states at odds. We went into earlier this year in January, coming up on another deadline, and ultimately we're at loggerheads. We had 6 states, and then in our case in California, us. Not a great moment, lots of press ink spilled, lots of clicks on various media websites. Not a great time. But what we realized, and at least our approach was in the lower basin, is this is not a constructive path forward. We have to solve this problem. And so our collective efforts in the lower basin, starting with small, open, frank conversations, started to form ideas. How about this? Can we try that? What do we think about this? And ultimately, over the span of time, we were able to form the Lower Basin Plan, this historic 3 million acre-foot contribution of water that's going to protect the Colorado River system for the next several years. That's a very different approach that I think is the one that we need moving forward. That is a massive improvement that we had in a very short span of time, just in this year, from the worst possible place the basin's been for many years to a position where we have 3 states that were at loggerheads just months ago working collaboratively together to protect the Colorado River system today. Was there fist pounding involved? This is my position for my state? No. There's a degree that we have to be frank, we have to be open, we have to recognize the unique dynamics in our state. But if we take that position moving forward on the post-2026 guidelines, the only time to compromise is when you can't advance your position anymore, we're going to be stuck. Everyone has to contribute. Doesn't matter your state, it doesn't matter your sector, it doesn't matter your geography. This river, we share it. And if we're going to be protected, all of our users for the future that we're anticipating with climate change and the worst possible scenarios that we have to model and be prepared for, everyone has to be a part of the solution. No one can be left out of it or leave themselves out of it.
Thanks, JB. Estevan, where do you think we can get to the compromise or consensus?
Well, first of all, I think I agree with the other speakers that really is our best path and hopefully our only path forward. As probably all of you know, New Mexico has been in interstate litigation on the Rio Grande for the last decade, and after a decade of fighting, millions of dollars spent on expert witnesses and attorneys and by Texas, Colorado, and New Mexico, ultimately we ended up sitting down and negotiating an agreement. And it is, and now we're arguing with the U.S. about whether it can be implemented or not. So that's not a good outcome. It's not gonna give us certainty in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's imperative. I think all of us up here agree that that's the best path forward. We have already identified kind of some of those third rail issues that if we insist on going there, we're going to end up in court. I think it's imperative that we identify all of those and commit to the sorts of compromises and really imaginative thinking that allows us to do what we have to do without that.
Tom, in my experience, getting to those compromises in the past have taken years. Do we have time to get there this time?
Do we have a choice?
I'm with Estevan. We don't have a choice, and we will. So, those of you who don't know, I was appointed by Governor Ducey, Republican government, in 2015. Governor Hobbs reappointed me earlier this year in January. I didn't stay here to end up in the Supreme Court. I stayed here to compromise and create a collaborative solution with everybody. And I think, as we have shown in the past, we can get there, and we have on many occasions. Again, the stakes are higher in my mind because more and more entities are impacted because of the magnitude of what we have to do. And the more entities impacted, the harder the compromise is. And I recognize all of us, and it's been said a bunch of times, are here to protect as best we can our water users. But as JB said, not to only compromise when you can't advance your position any further. And so I think it's incumbent upon us in the concept of compromising, of recognizing the issues facing each of us and trying to help each other deal with those issues in a way that, as Becky alluded to earlier, we can go back home and sell whatever we are talking about for a post-2026 alternative.
Thank you. And Jean, Do you think we can sell it back to our respective states?
I agree with what's been said. There are incredibly challenging issues. But I've also noticed, even though we may not focus on it as much as we should, we have a whole lot more in common than we have differences. We're all trying to protect a limited resource that provides not only a lifestyle, but a life for 40 million people. And that's something that we can't ignore. That's something we have to wrestle with. I absolutely agree that the folks at this table are in a much better position with all of you helping us to get someplace that will be better than where we are today. I agree it won't be perfect. I agree with Tom. There will have to be something that we can ultimately take home to our states. That's something we all have to be able to deal with. But I also recognize we're in a situation that's different than we've ever been. This incredible drought, whether it's permanent or not, is incredibly difficult, and it's going to require some soul searching and some hard work that has yet to be done, but will be done, no doubt.
Thank you. I think you have a unique situation here where the Colorado River community is in one room in some ways, and so I would like to give you guys the opportunity that you have a captive audience. If they had to leave with one thing from you guys today, what would it be? What would you want them to know? Jean, I'm going to go from far to my side this time.
I realize I'm older than a lot of folks in this room, but there used to be a commercial that said, "You've come a long way, baby." And I think we have. We've covered some things that have never been covered in the last 100 years. And I think we've also come to the realization that, as has been stated, we're not going to come up with something that's perfect, but we will come up with something that is significantly better.
Estevan.
You know, it seems daunting. It's such a big cut that we're thinking about, and in such a little bit of time. But you know, when Mother Nature doesn't give it to you, then we either learn to adapt or we die. And you know, in New Mexico on the Rio Grande, we kind of faced this probably a couple of decades ago, and it seemed we were frightened about what we were facing then, and then we did what we had to do, and we'll find a way to get through this, but there's going to be shared pain. It's not going to be continuing the status quo. And we're all going to have to recognize each other's, we're going to have to walk in each other's shoes as we get there.
Brandon.
Thank you. I think people have heard a lot of different perspectives this week at CRWUA. I think something important for everybody to take away is a deeper understanding of other people's perspectives and the challenges they face, and at some level, empathy towards those issues. We are all after the same thing, that's protecting our water use and protecting the system. The Colorado River is very complex, so are the very diverse issues in each of our states and our individual interests. We need to understand the different issues in each state, and we need to develop the solutions that can work for everyone, or we will not have a consensus solution. I think we also have to have an expectation of what we've talked about. It's not going to be perfect. We can't foresee everything. I think there is an off-ramp in this that if things get to a certain level, that we all have to agree that we will meet again and try to resolve the issues that we face in front of us. But right now, things are dark, but we truly need to understand where everybody is coming from, and we need to appreciate that so that we can work towards that consensus solution.
Becky.
I've heard a lot about we can't get to perfect, and I agree with that. We probably can't get to perfect, but we sure as heck can do better than what we are doing now. I think first and foremost, what I would hope that folks in this room get is that shared pain, first and foremost, comes from acknowledging the pain that others have already suffered. We can't be asked to share pain if you don't even know what we are experiencing. So when I hear the efforts that it took to save millions of acre feet of water and the years that it took, time is not on our side. We know how to save 1 million acre feet of water in the upper basin because it's not there. The one person that you cannot negotiate with is Mother Nature. She will win every time. She has been telling us what to do. It is our responsibility to listen and make an agreement that responds to her, that's responsive to hydrology, that's responsive to all the users. It doesn't put one user in one part of the basin as more important than the others. We have felt her wrath for 100 years. I want an agreement that lessens the pain for all of us, not just some of us. That's what I hope you take away.
Tom.
Give license to the people sitting up here that you support to compromise.
JB.
Ditto.
John.
It's so tempting. Just look, this has been a lot of fun. You know, it's obviously, you know, tensions are, you know, seeping through, and that's good. You know, it should be tense. These are serious things, and they require serious people. But contrary to my nature, I'm going to choose to end on an optimistic note. There's no silver bullet. There is silver buckshot. I had conversations with the Gila River Indian community yesterday about a project to desalinate brackish groundwater that the community could then use to replace Colorado River supplies and dedicate those saved Colorado River supplies to the benefit of the system, not to any one user. I had conversations with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California yesterday about advancing our partnership on the Pure Water Project to take water that is currently being discharged and lost into the Pacific Ocean for use by 19 million Southern Californians with benefits across the basin. There is ridiculous grass in commercial areas in every city in this basin. It should all be taken out. Nobody's kids or grandkids plays on a strip of grass in a median on any city in our basin. You may think saving 50,000 gallons of water on one of your projects anywhere in the basin doesn't mean anything, but it's a pellet of silver buckshot towards a sustainable future. We just had an F1 race in Las Vegas. And F1, would be surprising to some, is incredibly sensitive to climate change and wanting to ensure the sustainability of our planet. And they came to us and said, how can we have a zero water footprint for our race? We need 100,000 gallons of water to wash down the racetrack before the race. And we said, okay. The second largest use of water in Las Vegas is evaporative cooling. So they paid for and installed an atmospheric water generator on one of the cooling towers at the MGM Grand that will save 500,000 gallons of water a year. And that's not only did the race have a 0 water footprint, it had a negative water footprint. Now 500,000 gallons, what's that, a sixth of an acre foot, not even that? That doesn't mean a whole lot to agricultural users, but it's a pellet of silver buckshot. Expunge can't from your vocabularies. The savings we need are all around us. They're small, they're incremental, but they're there. That's what I mean when I say it takes everyone. I'm not asking for any state or any one water user to fall on their sword and make some sort of, drastic compromise that's going to endanger the future of your community or the future of your state. I'm asking every water user to look at every water use and figure out how incrementally we all contribute our little BB of silver buckshot to the solution. That's what it will take. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you guys all for putting you on the hot seat and having the hot lights be able to spotlight your issues. I also want to thank the crowd for listening and being here to soak in what I think is an awesome task that's before you guys. And I know you have awesome staff to help you with it. And I'm rooting for all of you. I want to say a couple of things that I don't think I was able to draw out with my questions as much. Every single water use sector, whether it's ag, domestic, recreational, tribal, Mexico, the United States, I think across the basin, there's one thing that definitely is the same, or it exists everywhere, and it's the natural resources in the environment that need to also be considered. I gotta do it. I work with them now. I gotta say it. But the fact of the matter is that the environment doesn't itself have a voice, like the constituents that vote and the politics that's played. And I just hope that we can remember that as important it is to get water to people, it's also important to keep it in nature. So, thanks everybody.